Now, in conclusion, this is a conference to celebrate the 60th anniversary of a great institution of learning, where the focus is on the academics and the, shall we say, production of graduates who are prepared and who are ready for service in government. The issue I would like to raise is the academic as a social activist. What has the social watch experience shown to academics and social activists? Is it possible to be a good, reputable academic and be effective also as a social activist? And in the photo you see Dr. Francisco Lemenso, former president of the University of the Philippines, great scholar, great academic, unbeatable professor, but also a social activist. And you all have to also Randy David, great sociologist, member of the faculty of the University of the Philippines, also activist, both professor emerita. Our field of public administration is like the Roman god Janus, which has two faces. One is the theory part. Many of us excel in theory. The other is the practice part. Many of us excel also in the practice part. But both are important parts of the whole field. A public administrationist cannot be whole unless he or she speaks both in theory and practice. We study government. We have to tell government the results of our study. We have to report to the people the results of our study. The challenge to us academics is to use our researches in the national effort to bring genuine and lasting reforms. Talagang tutuwirin natin ang baluktot na daan. The real challenge is to go out of the classroom, the school campus, the conference room, and bring the results of our studies and our academic views to the people, to the government, to the international community. The challenge is to engage the government, whether it be the executive, Congress, or the judiciary. The challenge is to dare dispute with the most powerful institutions, whether local or international, on what is the most important thing for us Filipinos. Who do we take care of? And we all know almost all of the statistics on poverty, all these horrible statistics on unemployment, and all those bridges which have not yet been built. And a true scholar of public administration, which all of you are, practitioners and politicians, can do no less. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Villanes. And with the challenge, we cannot do anything else but be social activists so that the reforms will be more sustainable and long-lasting. May we call on now Governor Joey Salceda. Fresh from the airport. Before his talk, let me introduce briefly the governor. Governor Joey Maria Clemente Sartes Salceda is the green economist governor and father of the Albay and Manila Declaration on Disaster Risk Reduction and Climate Change Adaptation. He used to serve as the Presidential Chief of Staff and member of the National Food and Energy Council of the last administration. Wag na yan, so without much ado, Governor Joey Salceda.
Good morning. My plane was late due to the weather. So instead of arriving 8:30, we arrived at 9:30, so I was kind of late, so I asked for your forbearance. Anyway, let me just shake my idols, of course, Dr. Lillian for And of course, Sir Luque, I think you're also a doctor. Everybody's a doctor, this must be a hospital. I came really because I'm a practitioner, so let me start with a few abstractions. So these are the takeaways from my presentation. First, really, is a successful climate change adaptation and disaster risk reduction. Once on the ground, must start really from a few principles. The first principle is that there should be a culture of risk reduction, not a culture of response, or not even a culture of preparedness. You know, if you can reduce the risk, there's no need for response. Next. Second, it's really a whole of government, whole of society. It's essentially flows from the United Nations cluster approach, which we did in 2006 in response to a major disaster, which affected almost 35% of our, which demolished almost 35% of our GDP, and affected virtually the whole population base of Tanzania. So when you say whole of government, whole of society, that's essentially first the local central relations should be seamless, especially when the level of a response. And the national collaboration is there, but the local should be the convergence given the primacy of local preference and, of course, indigenous knowledge. We know the terrain. And, of course, civilian and military are seamless partnerships. But more than the whole governance, really the whole of society. Once we're into this, I think even the church would know what is its appropriate role. The communities would know their roles, and there's a lot of things that happen prior to that to engage everyone so that you can achieve the goals, especially within a particular context like zero casualty in the midst of a major disaster. Next. And lastly, I think the foundation of all climate change adaptation is social justice. Ever since I became a local government practitioner, I think there's one single word that really that I have embraced, is really the word of, it's really the concept of fairness. Fair to the poor and fair to the future. Fair to the future essentially being concerned for the environment, and fair to the poor is really addressing certain structural injustices that prevent the poor from adapting to the impacts of climate change. So let me just read one paragraph. Disasters kill poor people, and climate change impacts make the poor poorer and breed more poor people. It is plain murder and constitutes a moral failure. Social justice is the fundamental basis of disaster risk reduction and climate change adaptation. It is the primordial duty of the state and the civic duty of its elite and the markets they control to save the vulnerable from disasters, from climate change, and from themselves. The more disasters, the higher the rights of the vulnerable and the higher the duties of the state. People have the basic right to the capacity to adapt. Relief, recovery, and rehab expenditures are essentially a compensation, a penalty on the state for failing to reduce exposure, as well as from failure in increasing the capacity of the poor, especially of the vulnerable. So let me now go to one particular example, because it's easy to mystify what is the concept of climate change adaptation. We'll just give you one example immediately. Next. Well, this is three things, but let me just go to one. Next. See, Albay imports virtually 1/2 of our entire food requirements, especially rice. You have a province that essentially eats rice. 98% of the people eats rice 3 times a day. And therefore, we import almost 320,000 metric tons of rice. We eat, but we can only produce so much. Next. We can only produce 1/4. So what did we do next? We produce 40,000 metric tons of kamote. Because rice needs a lot of, because of climate change impacts, and therefore limiting the capacity of our rice lands due to the impacts of flooding and sometimes due to El Nino, lack of water. But by increasing our capacity to grow staple food from our upland area, essentially through kamote. In fact, Albay now is the second biggest producer of kamote, and the number one, I think you would know. That's why it doesn't smell so good. It's Pampanga. Next. I'm sorry. I always get into trouble before engagement like this. So I decided to speak in English. Well, this is my province. Next. And what is the challenge in this kind of a province? Next. And of course, we're multi-hustler. We're the Vatican of disaster in this country. But because of that, we're also the climate change adaptation capital of the country. So it's not really, climate change is a given. It's what you do about it that essentially shapes the complexion and the direction of public welfare in your community. So it's just a given, but you have to do something about it. So we have the 21 typhoons, 3 or 5 direct hits, and we have a volcano that erupts quite very every 3 to 6 years. I will name a disaster I have. Next. But that's what I do for a living. So first, at the beginning of every year, I try to do what exactly will happen to my province potentially, based on experts' projections of what types of disasters. So I would know essentially where will it happen, which barangay, which town, etc. And I could prepare the resources necessary in order to confront them. Next. So these are our disasters. Next. 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 The problem there, of course, is it creates conditions of poverty. As this World Bank table shows, that I use about 260 million a year in capital, fixed capital, simply because of the impacts of climate change on our fixed investment, especially on our irrigation. So, I'm up against poverty. At the same time, we have climate change destroying the necessary investments in order you can grow income in order to reduce poverty. Next. So I have poverty, but I'm certainly the lowest in my region. And of course, number one is always Camarines Sur. Next. Next. And I think I'm bringing this chart to the cognizance of NCPAL. And if there's only one chart I would like you to carry home, is this chart. This chart is a graphical representation of the economy of the Philippines on a spatial basis, just where it is. If you look at it, the entire Philippine economy is NCR. Some in Cebu, some in Iloilo Negros, some in Cagayan de Oro, some in Davao, and some in Jensan. The rest is desert. And the tendency from an economic perspective is that this clustering serves as a magnet of siphoning because it translates into concentration of political power. Simply stated, most of the policies of almost every administration we have all known are simply anti-countryside, anti-poor, anti-rural. I'll give you one example. It's like a very small example. I was up against the SNEX contract. To many, it was just another simple government contract being given to one investor from Malaysia. But what does it do to me? In one single contract signed by the national government, I have to pay 480 million out of the small economy of Albay, being paid by small entrepreneurs, mga biyahero.